The arena was not silent, but it was waiting. You know that specific kind of humidity that gathers in a room before a thunderstorm breaks? That is what the air felt like. 30,000 people were breathing in the same recycled air. Their eyes fixed on the center of the stadium, but their minds were elsewhere. They were waiting for a ghost. The rumors had been swirling for weeks, whispered in forums, leaked on obscure blogs, and debated in the comment sections of videos just like this one. They said she was done. They said the injuries had piled up too high, that the political weight of the industry had crushed her spirit, and that she had found peace in a life away from the blinding lights. But hope is a dangerous thing in this business. It lingers in the empty spaces between matches. Inside the ring, the current champion, a warrior in her own right, paced back and forth. She checked her wrist tape. She looked at the ramp. She was trying to look confident, trying to project the image of an unbeatable titan, but the camera caught the twitch in her hand. She knew, just like everyone else knew, that tonight wasn't about her. It was about the possibility of her. The producers in the back were screaming commands into headsets, counting down seconds to a commercial break that seemed to stretch into eternity. The lights dimmed, just a fraction, a subtle shift that only the most obsessed fans noticed. Low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, shaking the plastic seats. Vibrating up through the soles of 30,000 pairs of shoes? It wasn't music yet. It was just a frequency, a signal. As the audience stopped checking their notifications, the conversations died out. The collective breath of the arena was held, suspended in a vacuum of pure, agonizing anticipation. They weren't just watching a show anymore. They were witnessing the calibration of history. And in that darkness, before a single note was played, the internet began to wake up. The second she appeared on the ramp, social media exploded. Hashtags flying, clips posting instantly because this return wasn't just big, it was historic. She stepped through the fog like a warrior, pyro blasting behind her, and the arena went insane. She's back and everyone online felt it instantly. But if you were there, or if you were watching with the volume turned up, you noticed something else. It wasn't just a cheer, it was a roar that sounded like pain leaving the body. It was a release. She stood at the top of the metal ramp, the silhouette that defined a generation. She didn't smile, she didn't wave. She just stood there, letting the wall of sound crash against her. The minimalist animation of her figure would show just the slight rise and fall of her chest. The only betrayal that she was human, and not a god carved from stone. The pyro smoke swirled around her boots, clinging to her like memories of past battles. For 3 years she had been a myth, a name mentioned in what-if videos. Now she was flesh and bone, walking down the incline with a deliberate, predatory slowness. Every step was a sentence in a new chapter. The cameras zoomed in, trying to find a crack in the armor, trying to see if time had softened her. It hadn't. Her eyes were locked on the ring, locked on the champion who was now freezing in place, watching her reign potentially evaporate in real time. The commentary team didn't speak. They knew better. Sometimes words just get in the way of the energy. The music was a thunderous orchestral swell, but it was barely audible over the chanting. The internet servers struggled to keep up with the upload speed of millions of screenshots. This wasn't just a wrestler returning to work. This was a queen returning to reclaim a kingdom that had fallen into disarray without her. And as she slid under the bottom rope, standing up to face the hard cam, the world didn't just watch. The world paused. While the arena was vibrating with physical noise, a different kind of explosion was happening in the silence of bedrooms and subway cars around the world. The notification bars on millions of phones lit up simultaneously, creating a global constellation of blue light. It is fascinating to think about how a single human being walking into a room can alter the digital landscape of a planet. She's here. It's happening. I'm crying. The messages were short, frantic, typed with trembling thumbs. The trending tab on social media didn't just shift, it was conquered. Politics, news, whether everything was pushed aside for the narrative of the return. People who hadn't watched the product in years, people who claimed they had grown out of it, were suddenly logging back in, desperately trying to find a stream. It was nostalgia weaponized. It was the feeling of seeing an old friend who you thought was dead. But amidst the celebration, there was chaos. The streaming services hosting the event began to buffer. Sheer volume of traffic was acting like an unintentional denial-of-service attack. The grainy, pixelated images of her silhouette became modern art, shared and reshared until they were fried with digital artifacts. In this moment, the story wasn't being told by the writers in the back or the commentators at the desk. It was being told by the fans. They were the ones building the mythology in real time. There is a strange intimacy in this digital connection. A stick figure, sitting alone in a dark apartment in London. Another in a crowded bus in Tokyo. And another hiding in a bathroom break in New York, of them connected by the same rush of dopamine. They weren't just watching a return. They were participating in a moment of cultural monoculture, a rare occurrence in a fragmented world. The internet didn't just break. It united, briefly, under the banner of shock and awe. Inside the squared circle, the digital storm felt a million miles away. Here, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and sweat. The music had cut out. The pyro smoke was drifting up into the rafters, dissipating into a gray haze. Now it was just two women standing 6 feet apart. The champion, clutching her gold belt so tight her knuckles were white, and the returner hands loose at her sides, dangerous in her relaxation. This is the part of the story that scripts can't dictate. You can write the entrance, you can plan the fireworks, but you cannot script the chemistry of a stare-down. It has to be real. The champion was looking at the woman who built the house she was currently living in. There was fear there, yes, but also a flash of anger. Why now? Her eyes seemed to ask. Why come back when I finally reached the top? The returner didn't blink. She looked at the championship belt, not with greed, but with familiarity, like it was an old pet she had left behind. She took a half step forward. The crowd gasped, sharp, collective intake of breath that sounded like a vacuum sealing. She didn't throw a punch. She didn't hit her finisher. She simply raised a microphone that she had pulled from her jacket. The weight of the microphone felt heavy. It had been years since she held the power of the arena in her hand. She looked at the hard camera, then at the fans, and finally back at the champion. The silence stretched so thin it felt like it would snap and whip across their faces. It was a silence that cost millions of dollars to produce, but in that moment it was priceless. She opened her mouth to speak, and the world leaned in. The moment she passed through the heavy black curtain and out of the view of the audience. The goddess died, and the human returned. The adrenaline that had sustained her out there on the ramp evaporated instantly, leaving behind the heavy, crushing weight of reality. Her shoulders slumped. The stoic, warrior-like expression dissolved into a grimace of pure exhaustion. Backstage is a strange purgatory. It is a place of wires, duct tape, and half-eaten catering. As she walked down the narrow hallway, the reaction from the locker room was complicated. The younger talent, the ones who had grown up idolizing her, looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. They pressed their backs against the concrete walls to let her pass, as if touching her would burn them. But the veterans? The ones who had been there when she left? Their eyes held a different story. There was respect, certainly. But there was also a sharp, metallic tang of jealousy. The screen time she got was a minute taken away from them. Every cheer she earned was a cheer they hadn't received. She could feel their gazes on her back, heavy and judgmental. They were wondering if she still had it. They were wondering how much she was being paid. They were wondering if she was going to steal their spot at the biggest show of the year. She didn't stop to talk. She couldn't. Her hands were shaking a fine, rhythmic tremor that she hid by balling her fists. She walked past the producers who were clapping, past the cameramen who were trying to get a candid shot for the documentary, and straight toward her locker room. The noise of the arena was muffled here, a distant roar like the ocean, reminding her that the beast was awake and it would be hungry again soon. The door clicked shut, sealing out the madness. For the first time in 6 hours, there was silence. Real silence. She sat down on the hard wooden bench, the costume that made her look like a superhero feeling suddenly uncomfortable and tight. She began to unlace her boots, her fingers fumbling with the knots. She looked up at the mirror. The harsh vanity lights were unforgiving. They showed the fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. They showed the scar on her shoulder from the surgery that was supposed to end her career. She wasn't the same person who had left. She was older, was wiser, but she was also more fragile. Why did she do it? That was the question haunting the empty room. She had money. She had a legacy. She could have stayed home, safe and preserved in the amber of nostalgia. But there is an addiction to the roar. There is a sickness in the need to be seen, to be worshipped, to be the center of the gravity. She touched the glass of the mirror as if trying to connect with the woman she used to be. Her phone buzzed on the bench. It was vibrating continuously, dancing across the wood. Messages from family, friends, old rivals, and business managers. She ignored them all. She needed this minute to mourn the quiet life she had just sacrificed. She had just set fire to her privacy for the sake of one more moment in the sun. A single tear, animated simply as a sliding white drop, moved down her cheek, not out of sadness, but out of an overwhelming release of pressure. She was back. For better or for worse, she was back in the machine. The sun rose the next morning, but the narrative had already been set in stone. The news cycle was ruthless. The sports talk shows, usually obsessed with football or basketball, were running segments on her return. The clip of her entrance had more views than the actual main event match of the evening. The algorithm had chosen its queen, and it was feeding the public exactly what they wanted. But for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The fallout was landing squarely on the shoulders of the current roster. The champion, the woman who had carried the company on her back for the last grueling year, found herself relegated to the sidebar. Her frantic emotional promo after the show was cut for time. Her match was mentioned as a footnote. The headline was, "She returns, not champion retains." In the hotel lobby, the tension was palpable. The wrestlers gathered for breakfast, scrolling through their feeds, seeing their own hard work buried under the avalanche of nostalgia, creates a specific kind of bitterness. It is the realization that meritocracy is a lie. That star power, pure and undefined, outweighs work rate every single time. The returner wasn't just a wrestler. She was a gravity well, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. The media didn't care about the locker room morale. They wanted the clicks. They wanted the controversy. Articles were already being written. Is she too old? Can she keep up? The dream match we never thought we'd see? The machine was churning, grinding up the reality of human emotions and spitting out content. The returner woke up to a world that was obsessing over her, but in doing so, it was erasing everyone else. The guilt of that erasure was the first thing she felt when she opened her eyes. She needed to hear a voice that didn't know her stage name. She dialed the number, standing by the hotel window, watching the rain streak against the glass. The city below was gray and indifferent. When the voice on the other end answered, soft, familiar, unconcerned with ratings or buy rates, her shoulders finally dropped for real. "Did you do it?" the voice asked. "I did," she whispered. "How did it feel?" "Loud." It felt loud. This conversation is the anchor. It's the reminder that beneath the pyro and the leather jackets, there is a person who buys groceries and worries about taxes. The person on the other end of the phone didn't care about the pop. They cared about her neck. They cared about her mental state. They asked if she had iced her knees. They asked if she had eaten. This is the side of the return that the cameras never show. It's the family members who hold their breath every time she takes a bump. The partners who have to deal with the mood swings and the adrenaline crashes. She looked at her reflection in the window glass. To the world, she was a returning conqueror. To the voice on the phone, she was just someone who had agreed to walk into traffic again. "Be careful," the voice said before hanging up. It wasn't a warning about the wrestling moves. It was a warning about the lifestyle. It was a warning about losing herself again in the reflection of the crowd's adoration. She hung up the phone, the silence of the hotel room deafening compared to the chaos of the night before. The next night, she stood in the center of the ring again. But the energy was different. The initial shock of the return had faded, replaced by a deep, curious listening. They wanted to know why. She held the microphone, looking at the thousands of faces. She could have cut the standard promo. She could have said, "I'm back to win the title," or "I'm back to kick ass." That's what the scriptwriters handed her earlier that day. But she crumbled the paper in her pocket. She looked into the camera, her eyes glassy. "I didn't come back because I wanted to," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "I came back because I couldn't stay away." She spoke about the silence of a normal life. She spoke about waking up in a quiet house and feeling like a ghost in her own life. She admitted that the applause is a drug, and she was an addict. It wasn't a hero's speech. It was a confession. She stripped away the mystique she had built up over 24 hours and showed them the cracks. The crowd didn't cheer. They applauded, slowly, respectfully. They understood. They realized that they were part of the cycle. Their demand for entertainment was the fuel that kept her from finding peace. It was a complicated moment of shared responsibility. She wasn't just a character anymore. She was a mirror reflecting their own need for bigger, louder, more intense moments. She told them that this run wasn't going to be forever, that she was running on borrowed time. "I'm here to finish the story," she said, "before the story finishes me." As she turned to leave the ring, the music hit again loud, triumphant, erasing the somber tone of her speech. The machine doesn't like sadness. It likes victory. She walked up the ramp, high-fiving the fans, slipping back into the mask of the superstar. But as she reached the top of the stage, right where she had appeared through the fog the night before, she stopped. She looked back at the ring. She looked at the commentators. She looked at the spot where the champion had stood. And then a small, sad smile touched her lips. The twist wasn't a heel turn. It wasn't a surprise attack. The twist was the realization that hit her and the audience at the exact same moment. She hadn't come back to win the title. She hadn't come back to defeat the champion. The camera zoomed in on her eyes one last time. The fire that used to be there, the burning, desperate need to be the best, was gone. In its place was something else. Gratitude. And perhaps a goodbye. She wasn't beginning a new era. She was starting her farewell tour. The internet-breaking moment wasn't a resurrection. It was the beginning of the end. She raised her hand, not in a fist of victory, but in a wave. A simple human wave. The screen faded to black.